Hello everyone, welcome to our second attachment conversation of the semester. زي ما بنقول دايما احنا it's a topic related to attachment. We take it from a different perspective كده every time. هعمل a very quick couple of reminders قبل ما introduce our guest for today. أولا you will find QR codes around. Please make sure to register to scan the QR code and register علشان it's important for us to know who's interested in the different topics to be able to reach out بعد كده كمان لما يبقى في حاجات similar. الحاجة الثانية إنه إحنا we record الtalk to be able to later post them بعد كده على virtual library of the lab. This is just a general كده statement إنه this will be recorded. If you have any issues with the recording, please let us know بقى ممكن لو حد مش حابب إن هو يطلع على حاجة. Going back to our guest, May يعني I'm very happy to have May النهارده معانا. May is an adjunct professor في psychology department فكتير منكم هيبقى عارفها already أو أخد courses معاها. May كمان graduate من ال counseling psychology master's program في الجامعة. She's a counseling therapist and she works with different areas including parenting issues, including دلوقتي existential topics. Her PhD is currently هي بتعملها حاليا وعلى بالذات existential psychotherapy. فالنهارده اتكلمنا أكتر عن التوبيك ده. يعني welcome to the lab, May.
Thank you, Noor. Very excited to be here. Very excited to see familiar faces and so proud of everything the lab is doing and so honored to be a tiny part of that.
Thank you so much. عايزة الأول نبتدي كده إن أنت تقولي لنا what got you interested في existential psychotherapy تحديداً. مش كل حد هيبقى قاعد النهارده ممكن يبقى familiar بالديتيلز بتاعتها أو يمكن هي مش من أكتر كمان الحاجات. إحنا بقالنا كذا مرة بنركز على حاجات مش بنتكلم عليها كتير قوي which I really love to do في التوكس دي. فلو ممكن نبتدي بإيه اللي got you interested، إيه اللي خلاكي تحسي بعد ما أنت بدأتي تشتغلي modalities تانية أصلاً إن دي حاجة عايزة تبصي عليها.
Okay, so that's always a nice story to tell. When I was taking my master's here at AC, when I was studying my favorite course, which is the theories of personalities, my favorite course, I had, and I still have it till now, I had an assignment that was, we were required after we finished everything, we said to talk about which modality did we feel more connected to and we want to dig more into. And back then I wrote existential and I had no idea that this is something you can actually study in. But I think in a way it clicked with a lot of my personal beliefs and values, how it focuses on personal choices, how it focuses on how we are. I tend to go more onto the humanistic side of psychotherapy. I am trained mainly in psychodynamics, but I also believe in the part of humanistic that believes in the ability of people to change their lives and their freedom of choices. And I think the philosophical part of it was very intriguing for me. And when I found the program, and it was also convenient, I was doing my program in the UK and I was able to do my hours in here and do it remotely, I think it was just on point. I'm in my second year now. I think it's balancing also because going into psychodynamics, sometimes you get a little bit too stuck into the analysis and trying to understand why people are the way they are and trying to find reasons on why we are struggling with what we're struggling with. I think existential balances this very well with being in the moment and focusing more on your choices and the way forward, and that you have, it's not your past that have decided on who you have become. So I think it has become, I was lucky to have this balance in my training.
Yes, that's a very interesting combination. عامة psychodynamic مع existential combination خطيرة جدا. I think the philosophical aspect بتاع existential psychology عامة gets many people to be interested قوي في الحتة دي بالذات لو هم بيحبوا philosophy يعني. وكمان it gets many people intimidated من الحتة existential اللي هو إيه ده what are we letting ourselves into, this is too big and too abstract and so on. فلو عايزين إن احنا نوضح الحاجات أكتر أو نتكلم عن حاجات specific، خلينا نبتدي بالفريمورك الكبير شوية بتاع four main concerns عادة بنتكلم عليهم في existential psychology: death, freedom, isolation, and meaning. These are four concerns. يالوم بيتكلم عليهم كتير قوي لأي حد بيحب يالوم. فممكن الأول نبتدي إيه الأربعة دول؟ ليه هما مهمين؟ How do they show up in therapy?
100%. What I love about Guillaume is that he bridges a little bit between existential and humanistic, so he's not very philosophical. He brings some of the philosophical concepts and he actually translates it into practical things that we can work on in therapy. So whoever is interested in reading in existential, Guillaume is one of the easy reads that you can dig into. I love this concept of the ultimate concerns, and I think it has been life-changing for me as a person and in my work as well. What he was trying to speak about is that these 4 topics specifically are anxiety-provoking. Every single human being, and I don't know if you've come across this, people in here, I mean, existential psychotherapy has a different perspective on anxiety. It's not like with other modalities like CBT, for instance, when we go and how do we make the anxiety go away. Actually, we believe that anxiety is part of our existence. As long as you are an existing human being, you're going to face anxiety, and that's a normal thing. And we differentiate between what we call normal anxiety and neurotic anxiety. Normal anxiety is actually there for a reason, and I think a lot of modalities now are starting to talk about the functions of what we're struggling with rather than making it just go away. For instance, if we're talking IFS, again, it's going to tell you that the anxiety is here for a reason. So with the same concept, we speak about how it is normal to feel anxious because this anxiety is coming to tell you something and needs. It has a function. So with these 4 concerns, these are concerns that every single human being is going to get anxious about at least at a point of time, if not every day sometimes. Death provokes our anxiety. Being alone, is life has a meaning, or does life has a meaning or not? Am I free with my choices or not? These topics are very anxiety provoking. And the whole idea is that the more I avoid addressing these topics, the more anxious I am. So that was the whole point of that, actually trying to address these topics and being comfortable around them and being able to sit with their anxiety and see what they bring in makes you deal with life in a less anxious way. Actually avoiding dealing with them is what makes them something in the background that you're always worried about. So like we always say, resistance creates pressure. So how for instance, I think death is a very good example. We don't like to talk about death. We avoid thinking about death. We worry about thinking about losing someone, about our own death. But actually that makes it something that is more scary. Because even from an existential perspective, what happens is that with our style of life and the stress and the fast pace, you're always very busy. And then some things in life will come and stop you and make you question the way you're living, your values, are you living your values? So one of these is definitely this. So this reminder is important for the limitedness of your existence here and your abilities, and makes you question, am I living my values or not? For instance, even I think the scariest idea of losing someone you love, it comes to tell you, well, are you spending enough time with them? They are here now, you are here with them now. What do you want to do about that? So actually addressing this is something that might be helping you rather than scaring you away from the idea. But with the culture, again, I don't mean our culture, I think the global culture now is that death is something bad that we need to avoid, we need to not talk about, so it becomes scarier and scarier until we have again to face it. So that's the whole idea with the 4 things. So that I think is very obvious. The second thing is the idea of meaning, which again I think we face more when we are in tough times, when we are making big choices, when we lose something, is what's the meaning? And I think we hear that a lot on therapy. People come in and say, this has happened, and since then I've been feeling, well, what's the point? And is there a meaning for my life or not? And from an existential perspective, again, every single person is going to suffer, but the people who have a meaning for their suffering are going to be able to live with that in a more fulfilling way. The third one is the freedom and responsibility. And again, I think this has been a philosophical/religious/ psychological argument that has been there forever. Are we actually choosing what's happening in our life, or is it happening to us? And it balances with the idea of responsibility, because, and I love addressing this in therapy, like, are things the way they are because I don't have control over my life, which is again very anxiety provoking. This is what's happening to me. People are bad. People are not loving me, are not good to me. ظروف كلها ضدي. كل الكلام ده. Or I think this is always a very big turning point in therapy when people start to realize their own responsibility about what's happening in their life, and they actually have freedom, and they have choices, and they are bearing the responsibility, the consequences of their freedom. And the last one, which we are talking about again, is the idea of isolation, or how we're scared of being alone. That's something I think every single person will also. I think this is one of the earliest things since we are in the attachment lab. I think that's one of the things we realize at the very beginning of life is the whole idea of safety is really related to our connection with others. We are social beings, so we are born and we flourish when we have real connections. But also, again, from the idea of limitedness, and I want to talk about this a little bit, is that, again, we don't have that much control over how connected we're going to stay to others. At the end of the day, there are going to be times we're going to face loneliness, whether we are alone or we are with people.
I'll ask you to pause here and pick up from this point again, but before I lose this point, because you're also talking about حاجة that's very important. And then we're going to dig deeper into isolation. In therapy, you're talking about big issues, big questions, big questions that we usually don't have the answers for. We struggle with finding the answers, and there is no manual that says, this is how you talk about death, and this is how you answer kaza. What's your purpose with clients? To simplify things. يعني مثلا احنا بنتكلم IFS or CBT or EFT or whatever. Usually there is a specific purpose, there is a specific goal, or approach to how you do things in therapy. In existential psychotherapy, when you open up these topics, what's your goal?
It's a very good question. I think one of the biggest breakthroughs happen when you are, and that this is why actually I wanted to talk about the idea of limitedness, because just reaching the point of acceptance that these things are outside your control, and that it's rather than resisting them and fighting with them for the rest of your life, you need to be able to live with how things are and adapt to. When I say limitedness, I say that this is one, again, of the scariest ideas for us as human beings, is that we have freedom, we have choices, we have a lot of power, but at the end of the day, we are limited in our resources. We have limited time in our life. We don't have control over a lot of things. We don't have control over how the world goes, when we're going to lose people, when we're going to be alone, how things are going to happen. And this is, if you think about it, most of our problems in life are about making sense of these things, or trying to fight these things, or not accepting these things, or the idea of loss, for instance, on any level. When we start accepting this idea that we don't have this much control over things and be able to live with this uncertainty, you cross a very big part of your struggle with anxiety, because a bigger part of anxiety comes from, which we know through different modalities, trying to control things that are out of your control. So when you accept that the idea is, for instance, is that I'm going to lose things, and I need to learn how to cope with that, and how to live with that, and how to be not okay, you're going to be sad, you're going to suffer, you're going to struggle, but I mean, like I always say, like you cross the line of acceptance, which is you're not staying off, this is not supposed to happen, versus this is happening, and how do I deal with that? What are my resources? What do I need to be able to survive that? Versus being in this fight of life shouldn't be this way. People are not supposed to be doing ugly things, and that, for instance, something I think in the last couple of years with what's been happening in the world, we all had questions about existence, and about human nature, and about God, and about why things are happening in this way. And I think what I try to do with clients, like you were asking, is that to be a little bit more comfortable with staying with these questions and accepting that there's not always an answer, rather than trying to learn the idea of being in the journey of trying to find the answers. And if you think about it, this is a big part of therapy. Like we are on an ongoing journey of trying to understand ourselves, trying to understand others. If you're thinking حتى schema, my relationship with myself, my relationship with others, my relationship with the world. So the whole idea that there aren't actually answers is anxiety provoking, but learning to actually enjoy the journey of trying to understand and wanting to learn more and wanting to learn more and wanting to make sense of this, to find an answer that works for me, not necessarily because there is an answer that would make, I don't think that there is one specific answer that would make 2-3 people here in the room comfortable, as much as you allowing yourself to go through this journey and having answers not met, staying with the uncertainty, staying with the anxiety of the uncertainty, and like in a sense, and I think that this is a bit far-fetched, but the idea that actually enjoying the journey, that for instance, this is something I personally believe that it gives me meaning for life, since we're talking about meaning, trying to understand myself, trying to understand people, and I think being in the field of psychology, we all know that the more we learn, the more we know that there are more unanswered questions, that there are things that we would never, so the idea of not being too clingy about the balance between, I think, كلنا من حقنا to make sense of things that are happening to us. But again, being a little bit more flexible about the idea that there isn't actually an equation for life. There aren't, human beings are not there to, we're just saying there isn't catalog, and this is what we do with loss, this is how we deal with death, this is why someone has left me, this is why, what I'm supposed to be doing, my purpose in life, rather than this to be more open to the idea that this is a journey and being able to stay with the uncertainty and the unanswered questions. So, again, that's not okay with every client. Some clients are here for answers, and I think that this is their right 100%, but I think it's very liberating also in a way when you reach a point where you are more open to just accepting that things are not going to go the way you want.
And I think there are ups and downs to that too. And have clients who reach that point in their journey, there will come a time when they will not be okay with it again, and it's like لا بس كده كتير, or that's not making sense, or I don't know how to deal with that.
100%.
But it's a struggle, and it's like there are lots of ups and downs.
100%.
So if we focus more on the point of isolation, so from the 4 ultimate concerns that we talked about, our focus today is more about the isolation aspect and the loneliness, the fear, the connection aspect. I like to distinguish between some terms before we get into deeper questions. So can we distinguish between what is social isolation, what is existential isolation, and what is solitude? Because these are 3 terms, or 3 concepts that can go under isolation, but they can have very different implications.
Okay. So let me try to and please help me out. I think when we're talking about social isolation and when we go, for instance, into the idea of generally social anxiety, I think we're talking about the external way of dealing with people. Am I socially active or not? Am I connected to others in a sense that is more obvious or not? And something to always remember about this, and this is something we discuss a lot. I teach pathology, so we discuss a lot, is that, for instance, when thinking about someone who's not being social, we always need to understand where this is coming from, because it can be from very different perspectives. So for instance, someone who's struggling with social anxiety, there are usually people who want to be around people, but they are unable to do that because they don't have the skills or the capacity or the ability, and we can work on this and develop it. But that's different, for instance, from someone who is uncomfortable being around people, or for instance, sometimes, and not everyone, sometimes people on the spectrum are, when we look at children on the spectrum, sometimes they are fine with playing on their own, and we want to force them to play with other people, and they're actually very comfortable with being on their own, at least some of the time. So I think when we're talking about social isolation, we're talking about the external look of things, like are people socially active, are people, do they have social connections, are they able to perform in social activities and meet their functioning requirements when it comes to social interactions? I don't know if you agree with me or do you have a different perspective on this?
Yeah, I would think more about the aspect اللي هو the how many friends with groups والحاجات دي versus existential isolation, which I think has a lot to do with more of a deeper sense, because even if you're surrounded by people, and we hear this a lot either with clients or with people around us, when someone feels like I'm surrounded by a lot of people but I don't feel connected or I feel lonely, okay, this is different.
100%. I think there's a very famous quote by Robin Williams. I think he mentioned something about this, that the worst kind of loneliness is when you are surrounded with many people and you feel like you are on your own. And interestingly enough, when we're talking again about the ultimate concerns, this is what we're trying to say, that every single person, at least at a point of time, they're going to feel that I am alone. It's not about the number of people that are around me. And again, one of the things we try to normalize or like at least accept is that there is a very, at least small, as much as we believe that we are social beings and we do need, we need real connections, and that's something very important, I think, since we're talking about loneliness and connection. There's a very big difference between being social and being and actually having meaningful relationships and fulfilling relationships, because also I think we are living at the most difficult time for people, for human beings in general, to connect to others, especially with everything that is being very fast-paced with the online connections. Yes. People, you can be very busy and you can have so many people in your life, but do you actually have this kind of deep connection where you have a safe space where you're able to share what's on your mind, to talk about things that are making you sad, that are making you happy, to have this kind of connection that makes you feel like nourished and like you sit with someone for a. Can you be with someone when you're not doing anything, where you're not interfering on mobile or you are watching something? Can you actually have this fulfilling relationship where you are just sitting down and feeling the oneness or the idea of companionship without necessarily being too busy doing things? So the idea of in the ultimate concerns is that on some level there is, and they describe it in a sense, Helon described it like there is a small bridge that no matter how close people get, they will never be able to cross to be in the exact same point where you are.
Yes.
There are things that you
will face alone.
100%. No matter how much you have people around you, no matter how much people you have fulfilling relationships, no one is going to experience things the way you experience them. So when you lose someone, when you're going through a tough moment, people can be understanding and be empathetic and try to understand it from your perspective, but you are the one who's going to feel it. And there are going to be moments where you will meet people around and they're not going to be there for so many reasons, whether because you lost them or because Zuluba or because how life goes or because they don't want to be with you, whatever. So I think here the idea is the balance between understanding how much we need fulfilling relationships and connections, but at the same time having a minimal level of safety and comfort being on our own. And I think that's a very tricky thing. And I think that this is one of the biggest journey that we all struggle with, to find that spot, even with therapy, with everything, where is the line where you can appreciate or at least accept being on your own and going through things on your own, but at the same time doing it without, because if you think of avoidant attachment, it presents itself in that idea, like you don't need anyone, you can be on your own, and that's not what we're saying. We're saying actually you do need connections, you do need people, but it can be like what your happiness depends on and what your safety depends on. You need to be able to be on your own. And interestingly enough, what Yelum was suggesting is that when we reach this point, we actually have more fulfilling relationships, because it's not about, I'm going to die if you're not here.
Yes.
I can be alone when you're not here, but I'm but I'm safe and fine, and I have a certain level of self-fulfillment that you add to it when you're with me, and I want to be with you and I want to be connected with you.
Which removes some of the burden that is usually put on the other person when they get the sense, you make me happy, or I can't live without you. Okay, there's a burden that's put on the other person.
100%. I always say this in the beginning of couples therapy, and I think a lot of the people don't like it when I do say it. like and I think the whole perspective, and I hear a lot مثلا ناس كتير بتقول sometimes people go to couples therapy and they get divorced, and I say we don't know that this is a bad thing. If they made the decision after raising their awareness and again having it out of choice, not out of getting out because this is the only way out. But actually I like to put this on the table when we're working with couples, because the idea of burden that you just mentioned, the idea that I can leave if this is not something healthy for me and I'm staying because I want to stay.
Yes.
I think it removes a lot of pressure from the people and from the relationship itself. If there is no way, if I and literally people say that I will die لو خرجت منها هيجرى لي حاجة مش هقدر أكمل حياتي. So again, it doesn't become about the intentionality, about the choice, about the me wanting to be here. And I think that's the core of attachment as well. Like I can't survive without this form of
and the
connection.
balance. I'm able to be on my own, but I'm also able to be with others. You reminded me now. It was just yesterday, last night. I was watching had شاف Hind, this new mini series بتاعت لا ترى ليس كما يبدو. It's been very trending. Many people have been talking about it. شوف have you seen it ولا لا? It's a very abusive relationship, and she really couldn't leave. It comes from childhood trauma وحاجات كده, and it's really reminding me about this concept. And sometimes we choose to be in a relationship, or we choose to cling to relationships because of our fear of loneliness or rejection or abandonment, not because this relationship is adding anything to me in that sense. بس بنفس الطريقة, I want to ask the question from the other side. If we're saying that someone who has an avoidant attachment supposedly is independent, more comfortable with independence, that's how they present, and they don't need connections. Elwy, they're fine on their own. Are we saying that this person is really okay with this idea of solitude and loneliness? Are they better able to deal with it? Are they better able to regulate their emotions and to accept it حتى as a fact of life? Well, that's only how they present it to me.
I think at least theoretically, I think it's a very different thing, because again, what we know about insecure attachment, again, like what we were saying about the social connection at the beginning, people, it's not that they don't want the attachment, they want the attachment and they need the attachment, but they're scared of the attachment, and their way of coping with it is to avoid the real connection because it scares them.
Yes.
And we know all the ones that got us here, but the whole thing is, it's with avoidant is very tricky, because again, what I've learned is that it's safer to be alone, but actually it's not, because I don't want to be alone, so it gets very confusing.
It's a core fear at the end of the day.
100%. It's not because I'm safe when I'm alone. It's, you know, that the whole idea, حتى ساعات الناس they say it in a very generic way, like staying away from people, I'm not going to get hurt, it's safer, but actually we're just saying we are social beings, we need connections. So even when there are connections, they aren't deep, they aren't as fulfilling as we were saying. So again, that's not the whole idea, and I always think of to what extent is this a choice, or is it something I am in control of? Because in insecure attachments, it's not a choice. It's not something I am able to do differently. Like yeah, just yesterday I had a session with a client I've been working with for a very long time, and a lot of our work has been about his relationship with his parents. He's an adult, and how it has been very anxiety-provoking. And while we were talking, he mentioned that I started to notice that I've become avoidant, or I'm avoiding dealing with them when my brother is around now. And we had a discussion about this, because I told him I don't think this is avoidance. I think there is a very big difference between me choosing to be away from things that are harmful for me because I'm setting boundaries or I'm creating new spaces, versus avoidance is usually something I'm doing unconsciously. I'm unable to do something differently. I get very scared when people get very close. I get very scared when I feel that these people might reject me at a point of time, so I don't allow them after a specific point to get that close. What we're trying to say is that we want to, which I know sounds a bit ideal, but the idea is that I want to be able to feel safe with real connections and get connected to people and close to people. But at the same time, I don't want my life to depend on it. So I want, in a sense, to be able to have a certain level or ability of safety that I can experience on my own. So I think it can be the same, because I don't think with avoidant attachment people get to experience real connections, and they are actually fulfilled with their connections, because they're always leaving this gap between them and others, because it's always very scary when it gets closer. I don't know what your perspective.
يعني زي ما هما they don't allow other people to get close. I also think they don't allow themselves to experience a corrective emotional experience in many cases. لأنه لو أنا I keep reconfirming my beliefs by recreating the same environments that kind of confirm it, then I'm not allowing myself and I experience things differently. I give examples مثلا in my class sometimes, if I'm avoidant and I'm going through a very tough time and I come to campus and I'm walking around pretending to be okay, someone asks if I'm fine, do you need anything, and I don't allow them in with healthy boundaries وكل حاجة, but I don't allow them in, most probably I'm also not allowing myself to be supported enough or to experience relationships differently, because I'm recreating the same dynamic.
100%. And thinking from psychodynamics, this is exactly what happens even in relationships, because I keep pushing them. I push people away before I allow them to get a chance to get close, because I know in my mind they're going to leave anyway. Exactly. So sometimes I do push them. I create it. What's familiar.
Can I add something just more to this? I think another element of this that adds something else to this is authenticity, and the role of authenticity in existential therapy. And that a lot of the times what you try to do with clients is to make them see if the way they're living is truly authentic to, or the way they're acting is truly authentic to how they believe life is. So with someone who's avoidant, the idea a lot of the time is, are you avoidant because you authentically believe you want to be alone? Or are you just saying that and the authentic version of you is just too scared? Because like you said, they're not used to this idea of closeness, they're not allowing it. So you're just scared of allowing yourself this, or you truly want to be alone. If you truly want to be alone, then fine, then let's stay alone. But just the concept of what avoidant attachment is and how we define it usually means that the person isn't authentically wanting to be alone. They're just too scared of it.
This is what they've developed to be able to deal with the idea of this.
But since we have now a deeper understanding of this dynamic and the fears and the need for connection behind it and all of that, can you give us an example of how you would work through that with a client?
The whole idea of being alone? Well, I think
working through the fears and the defenses and getting into this idea of connection more.
I think what I believe is a very big important part of therapy is always the idea of seeing the pattern rather than hearing about it. I think it's always very eye-opening when clients start seeing how we go through the same patterns in different situations. So I think that's always the first thing that we try to work on, bringing awareness to what happens when you are alone. So for instance, when and by the way, when I'm saying that what happens when you're alone, this can go from someone who has been dating so many people, and we start noticing that what happens every time after a breakup. So sometimes people start immediately looking for other options. Sometimes people start looking for options before they get out of a relationship, because the whole idea of me being on my own. And again, I think that we need to keep in mind the time and space where we are in now is very encouraging of that. I don't know, I've been reading a very interesting research about how relationships have been affected in the last few years because of the fake idea of availability. Like people think that their options are more than they actually are because of social media, dating apps and everything. So if you're like single in your 20s or 30s, 30 years ago, you know that your options are the people you work with, the people that you see in your exercise, for instance, in your neighborhood, which is probably 4 or 5 people, and these are the people you need to choose from and settle with and work on your relationship with. And interestingly enough, it's still the same 4 or 5 people that probably are going to be your potential, but in your mind, because of what you see on social media and dating apps, you think you have hundreds of options, so people are not settling, are not putting more effort and willing to work on relationships, because people go back from dates and start swiping again to see do I actually have other options or not. So this idea is actually, in a sense, pouring into the idea that I can feel that I'm not going to be very alone, even if I don't get very close to people. As soon as it starts to hurt, for instance, if you're taking attachment, I can get out very easily because I think I have backups. It's an example, يعني. But مثلا, this is something I try to work with clients on, trying to realize what happens when you start feeling that you're going to be alone. And it's very interesting when like you were saying, I need to be with anyone rather than being alone, and that would bring me into so much trouble sometimes. And this even happens in relationships. Sometimes a client comes in and I see a pattern of depression, for instance, depressive symptoms, let's say. So she starts talking about how her week has been very dull, how her week has been very miserable, how she's been whatever, but for some people she's been overdoing things, for some people she's been crying in bed, and I start asking, how has your relationship with your husband been this week? And she starts talking about how he has been very busy this week, he hasn't been attentive for the last couple of weeks, he's not present, and it's very interesting that, again, so this is the trigger. It's always the trigger that I am alone, and the same things are happening when I am not alone. I feel very different, or when my husband is present, or sometimes people actually use this word. I just need someone in the background. I need someone that is making noise, even if this noise sometimes, and again, we know this from attachment, is drama. We're fighting. They're hurting me. They have been cheating, but again, it's something that
it's there and it's familiar coming from.
I'm used to the chaos rather than to the boring, and they sometimes describe it that way as well. Even if they are in a relationship that is stable and calm, it's this, I need the excitement. So the first part is realizing the pattern. What do you do when you're alone? And people deal with that in very different ways. Sometimes they isolate themselves even more. Maybe that's part of the avoidance, I'm not sure. And sometimes people want to get busy and they do whatever it takes, which is basically distraction in a sense. Sometimes I can get busy with being with anyone, like we're saying. Sometimes I overwork, sometimes I use substance. There are so many ways that, again, I don't want, and this is what we try to this is our entrance. Where is this fear coming from? What does your system tell you is going to happen if you sit down and realize you're alone? And it's always the most challenging part, but we want the clients to allow themselves to experience this. Because what has happened, even if you think from a traumatic point of view, is that what's in the system, what's recorded in the system is that being alone is a very scary experience, is a very anxious experience, insecure experience. So this is what I know about being alone. So in a sense, we're trying to update the system that you are not that scared child anymore. You can handle being alone, but you haven't experienced that yet, to be able to accept it and know that you're a lot more resourceful than when you were alone as a child. So, and we also know now that with rejection, with parental rejection specifically, it does have the impact of trauma on the body. So it is something that your body stores, and whenever you are alone, it is triggered in a sense if it was an extreme repetitive experience. So people are very scared to actually go there and just try it. But the thing is, what happens is that I want the client, first of all, to accept that they needed to develop this pattern because it was survival at a point of view. Because it wasn't, because people sometimes like blame themselves. Why am I like that? إيه المشكلة؟ ليه ما بعرفش لوحدي؟ Well, it was too hard at a point of time. You were a child, you didn't know what to do, you did what you need to do to survive. But your system doesn't know yet that you're not this child anymore. So زي ما بنعمل updating كده للsoftware, you need your brain to know now that you're not this 8-year-old child who is very scared that if they are alone, it means that my parents are, it means that I've done something bad, it means that it's my responsibility, it means like that it's أنا اللي عملت في نفسي كده. We need to update the system, and this only happens by creating new experiences. So you need to allow yourself to experience how is it like to be alone now that you are this adult who is mature, more resourceful, more safe, and experience that is not going to be as traumatic as it was before, and then from there comes
hopefully it's not, but we build on it.
And the tricky thing in therapy is that to be respectful of the readiness of the client to experience this. I wanted to say something.
I had a follow-up just to what you guys were saying, because I think that's very interesting and theoretically I really get that. But at the same time, I'm trying to like think of this in a slightly different way. And that as if you're talking about someone who is alone, you were saying a lot of people might take different routes so that they may overwork, they may invest more in different types of relationships, they may use substances, whatever they may do. And that's technically not sitting with the solitude of it all, or whatever the actual term is. So I think my question to that is though, what are we trying to make life out to be if we're taking away all of that person's sources of meaning and dealing with that aloneness? I think they're all at the end of the day sources of making sense of that vulnerability. Someone may not have may not get that sense of meaning and fulfillment from their relationships, so they may get that from another source of their job or their community service or whatever they may do. And that's technically, it makes their life feel more full, it makes them feel less alone in a sense, because they are at the end of the day doing something you think is meaningful. How does this relate to what you were saying about sitting with the aloneness? And sitting with the aloneness means not necessarily putting that energy into something else. What does that really look like, or what are we trying to encourage in this case?
I don't think that's a good question. I don't think what we mean is that they sit down and do nothing. I think it's actually coping and finding meaning in different parts of life is very important, and is very therapeutic, and is very healthy. Yeah. I think the whole idea is the intentionality and to what extent I'm aware of what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. So sometimes, and this is what I was saying about the idea of choice experiences, is that now I know that I'm alone, I know that this is hard on me, I know that I'm struggling in a sense, and part of that is that I can still do things, and actually it's very therapeutic to learn to find meaning and to enjoy doing things on your own. But the whole idea is, again, to what level are you aware, and you are actually making a choice of what you're doing. What happens with avoidance and distraction is that it's not, ده أنا كنت بحاول أقوله للكلاينت امبارح إنه people don't choose, make different choices. It's literally sometimes أنا حتى مش واخد بالي إن أنا متضايق أو تعبان إن أنا لوحدي. I'm just too busy and running to not allow this to sink in. I think we see this sometimes with loss messaging. Sometimes people, and we're not saying that حتى is it right or wrong. The whole idea is that is there this moment where you're going to come to realize that there is a part in the system that is struggling with you being alone, and you're addressing this in parallel, or it's just something and then or I just locked it down and it's gonna هتنفجر في وشي like what usually happens with other things. So بالعكس, we actually want people to start experiencing new things, trying things out, getting fulfilled with other things, without ignoring the part of because we tend to go to extremes, like أنا خلاص تمام دلوقتي بعمل كل حاجة لوحدي مش محتاجة حد أنا 100%. And it's actually good that you're doing this, but don't ignore the fact that, and maybe by the way you start learning that there are other forms of connections and relationships that are fulfilling is not necessarily, and again, sometimes culturally we grow up thinking that the only fulfilling relationship is the romantic relationship or the way. Sometimes people find this in their connection to God, for instance, in a very spiritual sense. You know, I'm finding that I am not alone now that I have a bigger connection with a bigger being that is actually, this is the one thing that I can say that's going to be there all the time. So that's actually part of the process, the whole idea to what extent I am dealing with this thing that has been in the background.
I agree, it's a matter, I think, of, if you want to simplify it, if I'm looking at the question, I'm aware that this question is there, and this is one of my answers to this question, versus I'm taking this question and I'm putting it in the drawer and I'm locking it. But it's really, if we really simplify it, it really boils down to this awareness at least, and how else can I deal with it. I have so many other questions. I think I have I have so many questions, but I want to open it up for questions from attendees as well, so that we have a few minutes before we need to leave for classes. Anyone has questions? Yes, I have a question. You said in the environment, أحسن حاجة إن إحنا نعمل balance between إحنا في رضا عشان نكون لوحدنا وكده، أو for الناس أصلا نكون إحنا عارفين إحنا كويسين مع الناس. I feel like no matter how much we try to strike this life and lean towards one of them more. So I believe personally, and one factor that determines which one we're leaning more towards is attachment. But I want to know your perspective. Do you think مثلا someone with insecure attachment would lean more towards هيبقى أصعب عليه إن هو strike this balance and will eventually lean more towards إن هو يبقى أحسن مع الناس معهم أحسن مع الله?
It's a very interesting question. I don't know if there is a specific answer to form an equation. I think we also need to keep in mind the personal preferences and how we are born with different, even genetically. If we think introversion and extroversion, people need different spaces to feel more energized and recharged. So someone on the introvert side will need, even in a relationship, will need more space and we need more time on their own, versus someone who actually gets more recharged by spending time with people. So I think that's a very good point in helping people understand their own preference and what they need. And I think since we've been talking about this idea of being alone, I think that's a very good reminder that how creating personal space in relationships is healthy as well. And again, sometimes people get very excited being with someone, and they get, especially when it's something very good connection, we have similar interests, we have very good chemistry, we like to do things together, so they leave everything on others in their life and do everything together, and then there becomes a point where it's not fun anymore. I forgot who I am on my own. So I think it's very difficult, but I think creating this balance that at least the two things need to go together, that's a very good point. And then I'm aware what do I need and when. Maybe there will be times where you need more space on your own, maybe there will, and I think people forget about this as well, that relationships develop and change over time, especially if you're married for 10 or 15 years, if you are with your parents and kids, for instance. The kind of time I like to spend with my 13-year-old daughter now is very different from how the kind of connection I used to have with her when she was 5 or 6. So I think allowing ourselves also to understand what we need from these connections is very important.
I think I have more of a reflection than a question, because it's adding on to what you were just discussing. I feel like a big part of loneliness is also disconnection with the self. You yourself, you don't know your values, you don't understand what you want, what you need, you feel disconnected with your own identity and with who you are, and therefore you can't really build a connection with someone else when you have this huge disconnection within yourself. I'm wondering, in this aspect, how do you work on that in therapy? How do you help someone connect with themselves? Do you actually, take it in that angle, or do you focus on the relationship with others?
That's a lovely perspective, 100%. And it comes a lot in therapy, because we know that our patterns with ourselves is reflected to our patterns with others and how others treat us as well. So for instance, if I am someone who doesn't accept myself to make mistakes. Others wouldn't expect me to make mistakes. So sometimes a lot of the things that we work on in relationships, we need to address first with your and when you were talking about now, the way I saw it is that sometimes I don't want to be alone because this means I'm going to stay with this person that I actually have a big problem with, and I don't want to deal with the problems I have with myself, the questions I have, the guilt I have towards myself, the shame, the whatever. So I think that's a very core and interesting angle to tackle. Like, let's leave the other relationships now, and this relationship, the one you have with yourself, is a good thing to work on for a while. I don't know where you were feeling.
I love that perspective. I love the question. أنا كان يعني I want to say something else غير البتاع بس يعني just a moment of mini reflection كده. These kinds of questions make me feel إنه we have يعني wonderful students, wonderful alumni, and people who come really the depth of the questions and what's happening here. I just love it.
Yes.
That's the
Thank you.
input I have to share. Any other questions?
I actually tend to struggle with the idea of, first of all, with the word isolation and existentialism, because it seems like meaning and death and freedom. I get the words. I get that there could be an element of intentionality, whether it's for freedom or meaning. With that, I could come to accept it. And but when it comes to isolation, it seems forced. I don't get why the isolation or reconciled with solitude in a way, which has more of an element of intentionality to it. So, for instance, I might not be struggling with isolation, but rather the idea of being forced into isolation. So that's a question I tend to ask myself, like, why did they offer the word isolation? And secondly, when I think about secure attachment in a way, I think that you go into the word, you venture into the word knowing that you have a secure base, someone you feel safe and connected with. But the notion of existentialism is that you could feel safety and happiness on your own. You're whole on your own in a way. And you could accept that people are not constant in a way in your life. And it feels to me like it entirely contradicts the notion of secure base and attachment. Like, the notion of existentialism is detachment from all of that that's not constant in a way.
I think it's never that we are gonna be okay and complete on our own. I think existentially we do believe that we're social beings and we're always gonna need the connections. I think the whole point is accepting that it's not always gonna be there. And I think, like you were saying, it's not the idea of it being forced, but like the fact of life, whether we like it or not, just like we don't choose when people are gonna die or when we are gonna die, and we are limited in resources in that sense. We don't choose some moments where we're going to be on our own, like for instance when you get into audit amaliyat, for instance, or when you are facing the death of your child or your parent. No one is going to experience it the way you do experience it. It's always going to be your unique experience. So I agree with you that maybe the isolation is not a very accurate word, but it's the whole idea that there are going to be moments and you're not supposed to love it. And that's something that we always talk about. Accepting something doesn't mean that I like it or love it. It's just that this is how it is. We need to learn to live with it because it's going to happen whether you like it or not. But that doesn't mean that you would be always in a pursuit of the connection. And interestingly enough, if you do have a safe base, that would make you look for the right form of connection, which is going to help you in the case if you are alone or if you are connected to someone. So I don't think it's actually contradicting, but I do agree that maybe I do get your point about the use of the word isolation. I think it's existentialists بيحط حاجة في وشنا كده شوية, like face death, face isolation, face this. Sometimes this is why it's a bit dark sometimes, but I think it's the whole idea of accepting that life is not always going to be the way you want it or like it to be, if that makes sense.
Can I add something to that?
Yes.
The other part of the question كمان إنه your secure base is not going to be constant. فالcontradiction دي. So I think this actually makes a lot of sense. And for a baby, you would expect them to feel safe when the caregiver is around, as in the room. بعد شوية they grow up a bit more and they go to nursery or to school and they understand this idea of the internal working model. My mom is still there, she still loves me, she's still my secure base, even though I'm at school, she's at home, she's at work, or whatever. But with time, this idea of secure attachment builds more into a template and an internal working model more than I need this person to be constantly next to me. So if we extend this a bit more, if this person passes away, if this person is no longer around me for any reason, but I still have a secure attachment to this person, this doesn't go away. This doesn't take away the fact that I still have a secure base and I still have an attachment figure, even if this person is not a constant anymore.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So there's a difference في الفرق اللي احنا عملناه في الأول is it about people being physically there or the bond that has been formed, because again the other way around works as well, right? People can be there, the mother can be in the room and she's not attuned or connected to the child on any level. That's very interesting.
Any other questions?
Amazing. I had so much fun. I think for this one.